So I'm Steve Hall. I'm the Director of Enterprise Mobility at Xamarin. I work with Xamarin's large enterprise customers on their mobile strategy, their mobile architecture, just help them to be better at doing mobile in their enterprise. I come from a long development background. One of my first mobile apps I developed way back in 96, 97 helped a healthcare company. They had a bunch of nurses who went out to enterprises and gave flu shots. So the nurse would show up, and everybody during their break or lunch hour would come down and get a flu shot on the company. They get it for free, kind of a corporate service. And the healthcare company was trying to figure out, well, we've got all these issues with this. We send a nurse out. They have a list of names of people who are eligible for a flu shot. When they get their shot, they have to check them off, and then all this data goes back, and somebody keys it in, and then, you know, a couple of weeks to a month later, we can generate an invoice for the business and finally invoice them for the flu shots, and eventually we'll get paid. And they were really trying to cycle that time down quite a bit. So they thought, hey, you know, there's these cool little devices coming out now. Maybe we can use one of these. And so I spoke to the folks at the company about developing this app for them, and this was, you know, one of my first apps. I hadn't had a lot of experience here. I came up with an estimate of about $30,000 to produce this application, and the business nearly freaked out. $30,000! It's a 3-inch screen. What could possibly cost $30,000 to build this kind of app? Well, it turns out this app was built. Somebody said, you know what, we'll do it. We'll take that risk and have you build it. The result was they were able to increase their business. They were able to decrease the time of visits, decrease that whole cycle time, reduce all these errors on the back end, invoice their customers the day the nurse went out to deliver the shots. They carried along a printer with them as well, printed the invoice on site. ROI, less than 3 months, it turns out, for this company. But by and large, enterprises stayed away from those types of mobile devices at that time. A few years later, I worked with the state of Texas. And state of Texas, this was 2001, 2002. A lot of these states were reeling after the sort of the economy at the time, the dot-com bust and everything. And these states were really short on money, and they're trying to figure out, how do we get more money in our coffers? Well, the reality is the money's out there. It's just people are hesitant to pay it. And in Texas, I live in Texas, we don't have income tax. It all comes from business tax. And businesses are hesitant to pay this tax many times. So they had state of Texas has about 100, 150 tax collectors who would go out, visit a business, and say, hey, you know, here's the deal. You owe us money. We got to figure out how you're going to come up with the money and pay for this. But very inefficient process. Of course, all paper-based, and much government process is. So the Texas legislature enacted some legislation to build a mobile computing solution to help their field tax collectors go out and collect money from delinquent businesses. And in this case, this wasn't a $30,000 app. This is a $1.2 million application that the state of Texas embarked on, and I was the solution architect for the application. And we built all this great functionality into this application. We used a tablet PC, so it was a full-blown version of Windows that ran on this tablet PC, but used a stylus as the input device. And I could go out now, and as a field collector, I could go out to that taxpayer, my customer, and say, look, you're delinquent in your taxes. And they would say, oh, I paid last week, and I would say, you know, no, you didn't. Because I have everything on my tablet now. I have all that information on my tablet about their entire case history, how many times they've said the check is in the mail. And I'm able to do my job so much more efficiently. And actually, one of the unique outcomes of this project was that the people who are out there collecting money are loving their job again. They're so much more efficient. They're seeing the impact they provide to taxpayers within Texas. And in that $1.2 million expenditure, of course, you know, ROI is important. In this case, the ROI was 28 days. By equipping their field force, about 100, 150 people, with a tablet, with the right tools, we were able to make them so much more efficient that they were able to completely pay for this solution in 28 days. So mobile has an amazing potential to impact business. Mobile devices are everywhere. You know, with many countries having as high as 70% proliferation of smart devices. And this just doesn't impact one generation. If you think about PCs a little bit, well, you know, kindergartners don't have their own PCs in their room most of the time, and you know, you kind of stereotype senior citizens of having some problems with that whole PC generation rolling back a couple of years or a decade ago. But mobile devices, from preschoolers to the most senior of senior citizens, can use a mobile device. So everybody has one of these things that's available to them, and they use it for, you know, whatever appeals to them, whether it's doing business, being connected to others, playing games, watching movies, entertainment, those types of things. And of course, in business, devices are used everywhere. These consumer devices in healthcare, plugging in things for diagnosis of illnesses, interface to pacemakers. They use it to read implantable devices, just using your smartphone. The military uses it. We have an application when you're out with your team out in hostile territory, and you're thinking, oh, there's a ridge over there, probably some bad guys over there. You know, what do we do? Well, you send up a drone, and the drone flies over and takes a picture of the area, and you understand better through that better intelligence what's going to happen when you cross over that ridge. But the problem is there's a 40-pound suitcase with a terminal in there that you have to carry with you in order to see what that drone is sending back. And today that's done with an Android device. Just a cheap consumer device, able now to be field carryable for those Army units and view the footage coming back from the drone. Hospitality, everything from reserving tables at a restaurant to paying your bill. Great examples of what you can do with mobile. It's that combination of device features and applications that make it so powerful. If you think about what goes into creating an app, particularly an enterprise app, you have some challenges. You got to think about, well, how am I going to authenticate that user? How do I know who they are? And most enterprise apps aren't standalone. They don't just sit up by themselves. There's some back-end system you integrate with. So how am I going to do that integration? It's through cloud services, through some sort of mobile middleware tier. How am I going to talk to those back-end systems? And as we've heard earlier tonight, security is relatively important. How do I avoid, you know, being front-page news about my application having leaked data all over the place? But this barely scratches the surface when you think about what's involved in bringing mobile apps into the enterprise. All of these and more are very typical enterprise mobile app challenges. You know, you think about the OS versions you have to deal with, all the device form factors, that whole universe of devices of different form factors, pixel resolutions, everything that goes into that. Distributing apps, a very unique problem. When we developed that application for those nurses back on that Palm Pilot, you didn't think about app distribution. You know, you developed the application once, you imaged the device, and you kind of shipped it out and said, you know, no backs. Or you're not in that iterative process back then as you are today. So all of these things have to be considered just to build one app. But when it comes to enterprise mobility, we're almost never talking about just one app. No, we want to reach our customers. We want to reach our employees. We want to reach our business partners. We want to streamline all these activities and transactions and use the power of mobile to transform our business. And that means you're going to go way beyond just one app. You're going to go 5, 10, dozen, even hundreds of apps. We work with customers who have hundreds of apps on their roadmap. And then, so how is your enterprise going to support this? We all know that that the secret to success is simple. Secret to success for anything is simple. You write down everything you have to do, and you do it. And the challenge is knowing what you have to write down. And as someone who has a lot of cuts and scrapes and minor injuries from doing mobile over the past 20 years, I can hopefully save you some from making some of the same mistakes I have or have seen others make in that time. One of the most critical things you can do as an enterprise around mobility is create an MCOE, a Mobile Center of Excellence. A Mobile Center of Excellence allows you to get people from all areas of the business together, not just IT, but all areas of the business to focus on what are the goals when it comes to mobile for your business. How do you want to interact with your customers? How do you want to secure your data? What kind of devices are you going to use? What platforms are you going to use to create mobile applications? An MCOE requires executive sponsorship. Without executive sponsorship, your mobile initiatives die, the MCOE dies. You must have executive sponsorship as well. And this is very much a virtual team, although, you know, in enterprises we see different flavors and shapes and things like that of the MCOE. You know, it's typically a virtual team. You want a core group of people who sort of run the MCOE and then bring in that virtual team to make sure that you have representation from all those different areas of business. And the MCOE has several key responsibilities. One is to define reference architectures. Some problems you only want to solve once. I mean, how many times do you want to think back to that slide about authentication, integration, and security? How many times do you want to solve that problem? I want to solve authentication once. I want to make that a standard within my organization. In every mobile app, we do that the same way. Looking at other types of computing as well, wearables, surface computing, augmented reality. What types of interfaces will they have? Well, they share mobile's affinity for APIs. Mobile loves access to APIs, and so do these other types of computing. So this reference architecture is really critical. You know, if you're engaging lots of different teams within your organization or external partners to help you build that app, having reference architectures gives them a blueprint to show them how you like to do business with mobility in your enterprise. The MCOE must not be a barrier to innovation, but there are important things that the MCOE should handle. This sort of guidelines and governance, and best practices fit in here as well. One of these is maximizing reuse. To my earlier point, you only want to do things so many times, right? So making sure that when you do create something that you can sort of compartmentalize or componentize, version it. Make it reusable throughout all these different applications you'll develop in your enterprise. UI standards. You all know the bar for UX in mobility is very, very high. So having the MCOE help shape how you're going to develop the UI and the UX for your businesses is also very critical. And then security, device security, application security, data security. All those things have to be taken into account. And the MCOE is a great body to help govern that and provide the guidance to all these different teams that will build applications for you. So you've established that MCOE, you've established this reference architecture, guidelines and governance. The last thing is mobile DevOps. Automate everything from your build cycles to your testing to your deployment. That continuous integration, continuous deployment, you want to deliver over and over again in a repeatable way. And there's the reason that is not just to be agile and be fast and put out new releases. You are forced into this to some degree. Apple and Google and Microsoft, the providers of the primary mobile operating systems you're going to run across, don't sit still. New releases come out all the time, and your application has to run on those new releases. So you have to make sure that you have an organization, as an organization, are set up well to respond to those changes. When Apple drops a new version of iOS, your team's able to snap into action and quickly test and make sure your application runs on that device or new version of the operating system, and as well, respond to it quickly and make modifications if you need to in order to deliver the new version of the application so your consumers, your users, who will update their operating system very quickly when it's released, have an app that actually works. So certainly there must be some set of tools that helps this out, right? And about 2 months ago, Microsoft did what many people have expected or have desired over the past several years, which is they acquired Xamarin. They acquired the company I work for. Xamarin by itself was a very successful company. We have tens of thousands of customers. Over 1.4 million developers were exposed to our tooling. Over 350 SI and consulting partners work with our enterprise customers to deliver applications. We have tens of thousands of applications that have been written using Xamarin. You have the Xamarin platform, which allows a developer to build fully native apps using one language. So I can deploy to iOS, Android, Windows Phone, but I only had to write my core application once and just tweak it to make sure it runs the way you want it to run on each of those platforms. I can do that all in Visual Studio. I can all do that in one language, C#. Xamarin Test Cloud gives me this ability to test my applications on thousands of devices. We have over 2,500 devices in our test cloud, real, physical devices. So you can upload your application and use scripted testing to make sure your application runs properly. There's solutions for monitoring, solutions for accelerating your mobile initiatives. But when Microsoft acquired this, they kind of did something crazy. One, they made Xamarin open source, and two, it no longer requires a separate license. If you use Visual Studio or MSDN in your organization, Xamarin is now free. So it comes with Visual Studio and MSDN. So the final barrier for organizations to deliver better applications, native applications that provide a great user experience and performant apps has been removed, and that's price. Mobile apps don't stand alone typically, so we have a lot of integrations, whether it's Azure, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Google, SAP, IBM, you name it, we have integrations, and we have a tremendous number of very capable integration partners as well. In just 4 short years, Xamarin has become the single largest fully native cross-platform solution for enterprise mobility. Xamarin itself is an amazing success story, but our success story has actually driven the success story for many organizations as they have gone mobile in their organizations. So go out and build amazing apps and let us help. Thank you.
Well, we have time for one question. Let's Steve. Any questions? Yes, hold on. And if you're asking a question, could you please say who you are and what company you come from?
Steve Damadeo from Festo Corporation. The question is, you talk a lot about the Mobile Center of Excellence and DevOps, but the definition of what DevOps is a bit murky. What's the way in which you're talking about it so that we can work from the same information base here?
Yeah, this is a DevOps is its own 2-hour sort of presentation of what's included here, right? So I certainly covered things very briefly. DevOps is that whole, development and operations. So if you think of the tasks that are done on the development side of the house, if you will, and what do we do as developers once things were finished? Well, we sort of chucked our code over the wall to the testers and said, hey, test it out, and they threw it back and forth and so on. And then when it was done testing, that code went to operations and said, hey guys, deploy this, and they would again throw that over the wall. So one of the things that DevOps answers or solves is this accountability string between your deployment of your applications. There is no more, hey, it's not our problem anymore because we threw it over the wall to testing QA or we threw it over the wall to operations. You're a team now. Because in order to do that continuous delivery, you have to have you have to remove those barriers between those teams, and they have to act as one team. So it's that whole idea of bringing people into all aspects of development and operations. Developers go to operations, operations go to development to make sure that you have good lines of communication. The actual process that's involved, if you think about all the different things that take you from that design or even that idea all the way to deployment and monitoring of the applications, you have your design, you have your build. After you build, what do? You check in your source code, you compile it. So you want to use automation there in that compilation process. You want to build it automatically on that build server. Once it gets to the build server and builds, you want to automatically test it in something like a test cloud where you can test it against hundreds or thousands of different devices. Once that feedback comes back, you can iterate through that, make sure your application is bug-proof, and then it goes to deployment, automatically deploying to your testing QA users, so they get it on their devices first, and finally to your end users. Where once it's on their devices, the whole analytics kick in, logging, management of the monitoring of the application, and you get that feedback cycle from your users. So that, in a nutshell, is the full cycle of DevOps, both from a process standpoint and what needs to happen from a lines of communications standpoint.
Steve, thank you very much. And you'll be around this evening?
Yes, I will.
So please, if you have any other questions, track Steve down out at the reception. Thank you again.